Makes a huge difference if you'll do me a favor by subscribing and liking the podcast wherever you listen. It goes a long way. Thanks, and I hope you enjoy. Judd Kessler is an economics professor at Wharton Business School, University of Pennsylvania. His research interests are experimental economics, public economics, behavioral economics, and market design. He received his undergrad in economics from Harvard and a master's in philosophy and economics from Cambridge, and then a PhD in business economics from Harvard. In his research, he uses a combination of laboratory and field experiments to answer questions in public economics, behavioral economics, and market design. He investigates the economic and psychological forces that motivate individuals to contribute to public goods, with applications including organ donation, worker effort, and charitable giving. He also investigates market design innovations, placing particular emphasis on bringing market design from theory to practice, with applications including course allocation and priority systems for organ allocation. His research has appeared in general interest journals, including the American Economic Review, the Quarterly Journal of Economics, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and management science. His graduate advisor is Alvin Roth, who won the Nobel Prize for Economics from Harvard. And we talk about his book, his newest book, Lucky by Design, where he explains the hidden economics that affect our lives and how you get more of what you want and how you can strategize for that to get more out of what you want out of life. And it's a fun conversation. And I really um, really had a great time in this conversation, telling some of the stories from his book and how he got interested in economics, going back to high school, and I hope you get value out of this conversation. And also, you can find Judd. You can find his book wherever books are sold, Lucky by Design, which just came out, as well as his website, juddkessler.com, where you can find out about his research, his book, events, publications, media, teaching, and the like. He's a very popular professor at Wharton Business School. I hope you enjoy this conversation. All right, Judd, welcome to the Wisdom of Life.
Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thanks for coming on. I want to start with your book behind you there, and Lucky by Design. What inspired you to write the book? And was there a particular moment or experience that really set it off?
Yeah, I think as an academic economist, you kind of wonder, all right, should I keep doing the academic writing, or is there something else that I need to do? Like, do I need to try to communicate concepts to a broader audience? And the moment for me when I was like, yes, I have to do that, was I was sitting in an elementary school auditorium. This was a few years back when my son, we were trying to find a kindergarten for him. So now he's in sixth grade, but we was like trying to figure out, okay, where should he go to kindergarten? And we were touring different schools, and we were at one of them, and the Department of Education employee who was talking to us as parents started to explain the mechanism that New York City uses to assign elementary school seats to families and their students. And she had teachers on stage, and she put them in little lines as if they were applying to each school. And, did one get in, and what happened if they didn't get in and they moved to the other line? And I looked around, and parents were frantically taking notes. They were trying to understand the system. They were trying to figure out, where should, what's the strategy? And I'm looking around and thinking to myself, I know this mechanism. My advisor from graduate school won a Nobel Prize for it. I studied it in graduate school. You don't need to worry about all the details about how the mechanism works. You don't have to know all that or understand it, because it's designed to be strategy proof, to make it such that all you have to do as a market participant is rank the schools from your most favorite to your least favorite. And it's a little more complicated than that, because if you only, at the time, you only had 12 slots. So you should include in those 12 the school you were zoned for, where you have priority. So there's a little bit of strategy you need to do. It's only strategy proof when you can list an unlimited number of schools. But as someone who had studied this, I knew that I didn't have to be stressed out. I could focus on the hard thing, just, not strategically difficult, but the hard thing of figuring out which school program I wanted my kids to go to first and second and third. That's hard enough.
Yeah.
But I knew I didn't have to stress about everything else, that these other parents were worried about understanding the mechanism. And that made me realize that I was fortunate to be able to understand, have an economist's eye towards that type of market. And that turns out just one set of markets where having thought about things as an economist is helpful. That's a set of markets where there's a centralized clearinghouse and you have to rank your preferences. And that is helpful. But in the end, that ended up as just one chapter in the book because there's all these other markets that we play in that if you have a framework for thinking about them, you can kind of feel more empowered and do better in them. And so that was what made me realize that moment, but then kind of stepping back and saying, wow, people are in these environments where they feel stressed out, where they feel like things are just happening to them, that everything's based on chance, or some people are getting lucky and they're not. And I wanted people to be able to see these environments more clearly, understand them, kind of know what they needed to know so that they could succeed. Know if they have to strategize how to do it. And if they don't have to strategize, kind of tell them, don't worry about it. And so that's what prompted me to write the book.
Wow, that's really neat. You mentioned your graduate advisor, Alvin Roth.
Yeah.
When you were in high school, undergrad, did you know about him and his work? Like, was this an interest early on, or?
I I'm the first person in my family to get a PhD. So when I was in undergrad, I did not, I should say, as a high school student, I really liked economics. Like I had a high school teacher who I think had gotten a PhD in economics and then was teaching in our high school and kind of taught a very intensive econ class for 10th graders, and then I think again as seniors we took AP class with him. And that was like great. I really liked it. It was clear it was something I was interested in, but I didn't think of it as something you could do as a field, as like a career. I thought it was like, oh, that's something you study in college and then you become a consultant or you go to finance. Or so when I got to college, I had not thought about academia as a path. And I attribute a lot of this to a professor at Harvard named Ben Friedman, who I took he was an econ professor. I took a lecture, a seminar with him. And what he did, which I found, at the time a little nerve wracking, but in retrospect was great, is that he made everybody come to office hours. We had to come to office hours to talk about each of the papers. And going to office hours, being forced to go, I don't think I ever had gone to professors' office hours, but it made me realize like, oh, this is just a person. Like this is not, this like priest on a high mount
Yes.
who no one can approach. This
Yes.
is a actual person, and he has a family, and one of his sons ended up as an economist, guy John Friedman, who I ended up in grad school with. But it sort of realized, oh, this is a person who chose this as their career, and that would like kind of open my eyes, like, oh, you could do this. This is something people do. And then the most important thing was that at one of those office hours, I was describing, I took a social psych class, which I was really interested in. But I said, I really wish that the experiments that they did in that kind of social psych class were that we could apply them to questions that I'm interested in as an economist. And probably the most helpful advice I ever got was in my entire professional career was, hey, you should go take Alvin Roth's class. He teaches a PhD experimental class, and you should, maybe check him out. And that was it. I went to Al's class. I got hooked on the class. I got hooked on the experimental work that he did. I got hooked on the market design work that he did. And so when I applied to get a PhD, you're not supposed to in academia. You're not supposed to go back to the same university that you did your undergrad in. That's like kind of perceived to be kind of a bad strategic move. You're supposed to kind of spread your wings. But I wanted to go back and work with Al. And so I broke that rule and I went back to Harvard and I worked with him for my PhD. I talk about this in my book. This was one of the first stories because it really was important, part of my kind of both becoming an academic, but also finding market design and the experiments that the book has a lot of research in it. And a lot of it is experimental, and finding those, is basically just because I found Al.
Yeah. And when I first mentioned his name, I could see your face light up. And so and like still, right? Like That is so beautiful. That is so cool. What was it about that initial classes and experience with Al that you were like, yes?
Yeah, I mean, so I think it's a great question because, he is a great advisor, and as a academic now who advises PhD students, it's a lot of pressure to have had this guy that was so good,
Yeah,
to then what am I, and then I hear myself giving advice to my students, and I think that's something Al told me. Like I'm just repeating what he said,
yeah,
but that was like good advising, good mentorship, helping me develop into an academic who could answer questions and learn the methods and learn how to write for an academic audience and get papers published, which is publish or perish is a real thing in academia. So um, you know, he helped me learn that. I think more broadly, I did my undergrad thesis under his supervision. That was the kind of turning point for me. I took his class and then I did a thesis with him. And the idea of kind of being on the forefront of a research question and this idea that I'm going to collect data and then I'm going to analyze that data and I am going to learn something that no one else knows. Right? This is not like reading something in a book that somebody's telling you. I am going to be on the frontier of our understanding of this topic, a topic I have chosen to study because I think it is interesting and important. And I am then going to be the first person to ever analyze that data and see what it says. And that, I'm not likely going to be an astronaut. I'm not likely going to be a deep sea explorer. There's exploration I will not be able to do, but this was exploration I could do. This was kind of pushing forward the frontier, and so that got me excited and got me thinking. Yeah, I'd like to kind of pursue this as a career. But again, I was the first person to get a PhD in my family. So when I told my father, that after my 1 year master's, I was going to go back to Harvard and I was going to do a PhD. He was like, "Oh, is that like another year?" I was like, "No, it's like 5 or 6 years." And he started laughing. He thought I was joking. He's like, "No, really, how long is it?" I was like, "No, it's," and he was like, "Oh, okay, if that's what you want to do." But, it was a little skepticism that this was the right path. But eventually, now I got a job at Wharton. I get paid money as opposed to stipend. And then they came around to it. Yeah,
a roof over your head, food for your three kids. Yeah,
it is a career. It turns out. I knew it was. I saw it. Professors were real people.
right, right, exactly. They have a car or yeah, mode of transportation.
They're just like us.
Yeah,
They also go to the grocery store.
that's right. Yeah, pick the kid up from daycare. Yeah. So, like, when you started working with Al, how much prior, what was the timeline in terms of him winning the Nobel Prize?
So he won the Nobel Prize basically the year after I left. Got my PhD. Got my PhD in 2011, and I think he won 2012. Although I will say, the last paper that he published before they gave him the prize was with me. Straw that broke the camel's back. It wasn't
That's right.
mentioned. Nobody cared about it, but it was the last one.
Right.
Yeah, after his 150 other papers, maybe the one with me was the one that did it.
Yeah.
But the one with me was, I mean, it may not have been pivotal for him, but it was pivotal for me because it was kind of my first market design paper and kind of made me think, oh, this is a field where I'm interested in kind of exploring it, and kind of set me on a path that led to the book eventually. But yeah, so I don't think it got him the prize, but it may have gotten me to where I am.
Right, right. And what is it about that explorer's mindset with market design that drew you in, draws you in, where you're like, yes, like I want to be on the frontier, like somebody exploring the depths of the ocean.
Yeah, so this is, I think, um, there's a lot for folks who've taken econ classes or are kind of familiar with it. Economists, a lot of economics is we assume people kind of always behave in this rational way. We can model them like optimizing agents with maximizing some kind of function. Is like that's one thing that we often assume about people. And then another thing that economists often assume about people, or I shouldn't say about people, about the way people will interact, is that they'll interact through markets that are dictated by prices. So, you ever hear an economist say supply equals demand? That is an assertion that what's going to happen is that people are going to interact in a market where there's going to be a price, and the price is going to say rise until there's only enough goods for the number of people who want them, and kind of everybody's going to be able to trade. And so, if I had to say like what I thought of as the typical, what economics understood very well when I entered the field 15 years ago, was that kind of pair of things. People who were rational optimizers, selfish optimizers who always did the right thing, participating in markets that were mediated by prices. And so I gravitated towards things that were not well understood, that were not like those environments. I gravitated towards kind of behavioral ideas. What happens when people aren't fully selfish? What happens when they don't fully optimize? And what happens in markets where there is no price, there is no kind of way for the price mechanism to solve it? What happens instead? So that first study that my first study, Al's last before he won the Nobel, was about allocating deceased donor organs. So a situation where we don't have prices. Instead, we have some kind of other allocation rule that is going to decide who gets this life-saving transplant, and it's going to rely partially on people being generous, like agreeing to donate their organs when they've passed on, and it's going to have to operate through a market where we're not going to be able to pay people for things. And so understanding that kind of environment was something, for me, it was like a totally new setting, and trying to understand how it worked, I kind of felt like it was more on the cutting edge than just kind of doing another paper about when supply and demand meet.
Yeah, exactly. So what happened in this
Yeah.
situation? Yeah.
Yeah. So this is I talk about this a little bit in the book, but it's what we looked at in particular was whether you could use the way that the organ allocation lists were structured to generate more donations in the first place. So in the US, if you are unfortunate enough to need a life-saving organ transplant, you'll get on a waiting list, and the waiting list, you'll be waiting for somebody to die in a way that makes their organs available for transplant. So, the list that is the longest is the list for kidneys, because kidneys, if there's kidney failure, a patient can be on dialysis and survive for many years while they're waiting for a deceased donor kidney. And so in that situation, there's a bunch of stuff that contributes to whether you are going to be offered a kidney that becomes available. One of those things is how long you've been waiting. And nowadays, it's how long have you been on dialysis. The longer you've been on dialysis, the kind of more priority that you get. In other countries, in particular Chile, China, Singapore, and Israel, there is something else that enters the calculus besides your medical need and how long you've been waiting. It's whether you agreed to be an organ donor when you were young and healthy. Whether when you were 18 and in the US case, you went to the DMV and they said, "Hey, would you like to sign up to be an organ donor when you are getting your driver's license?" If in that situation you were willing to say, "Yes, I would do that. I would give my organs if I die prematurely," those people in those countries get priority over an equally sick patient who, was in that situation and said, "No, I don't want to be a donor." And so the question for us was, okay, to what extent could this kind of mechanism help increase the number of people who are willing to register as organ donors, now knowing that there is priority potentially available. So in that first study, we didn't have real organ donors signing up to be, because we could not promise them real priority. We couldn't change the U.S. law.
Right.
But we studied it in a kind of more abstract environment with undergrads playing a game modeled on the decision to register. And we saw what happens when you give priority to folks who have to decide whether to make this kind of pro-social, generous action. And sure enough, they respond to it. They like that it gives them, an incentive to be generous. If I agree to donate when I'm young and healthy, but I end up being sick later on, I'm going to get something. I'm going to get a higher chance of an organ. And they also, I think, to a certain extent, like that they are disproportionately helping other people who were willing to help, right? If I end up giving an organ in that system, I know that it's more likely to go to somebody else who was willing to give an organ because they have priority. So all of that is to say, that was an interesting question for me, because here's this market where we are not using prices, and here's this way you could redesign the market to actually make the scarce resource less scarce. Like the thing that we are all waiting for, right? You could generate more of them by creating an incentive for people to become donors. And that kind of thing made me think, oh man, this is really cool. Like we should better understand these markets. We should better understand how to improve them. We should better understand how market participants can navigate through them. Like all of this stuff is super interesting, and I want to explore it more.
Yeah, for sure. Do you do any consulting like in the medical field that you can speak about, like in this domain in this way?
No, I mean, I've done a bunch of research, on this question. So after that first study we did, Al and I did some more work looking at when Israel is going to roll out the organ allocation rule, what is the specific way that they're going to do it? And are they going to allow there to be a loophole where you can still somehow get priority but won't end up donating? They ended up being clever about this, but one could imagine if your rule was, if you sign a donor card and agree to be a donor, we give you priority. But what you don't want is a loophole where I get sick and I need a kidney, and so the first thing I do is go sign a donor card and then go get on dialysis the next day. And it's like, well, I'm an organ donor, so I should get priority. It's like, no, that defeats the whole purpose. You never were willing to give when you could have. You only were willing to sign when it was too late. And so Israel was clever, and they implemented a rule where you get priority either, if you are 18 and you sign a donor card at that, when you're first asked, then you get priority immediately, right? So it was your first time you were asked, your priority kicks in immediately. If for some reason you ended up needing a kidney at 19, you would be eligible. But other than that, they basically gave the whole country until a particular date and said, this is your last chance. If you want priority immediately, you have to sign by this day. And then they pushed it back 3 months, gave people 3 months more, just in case. But then it's like, okay, by this day, this is the absolute last day. And if you don't sign by this day and you're over 18, then you need to wait 3 years from signing to get priority. So you will, so if you change your mind when you're, 40 and say like, yes, I'd like to become a donor, great. We'll still take it. You can still get priority. It won't kick in till you're my age, till you're 43. And so that 3-year gap kind of discouraged people from saying, oh, I'll just wait till I get sick and then I'll sign, right? Because then it doesn't actually work. So that was a clever design tweak to avoid what would otherwise be gaming. And so we looked at some loopholes and analyzed the impact of what would happen if they were left in. And then we evaluated the rollout in Israel. So we saw, for example, what happened when they said you have until this date to sign a donor card if you want priority immediately. And we saw, looking over time, comparing kind of the regular rate of people signing to the rate leading up to this, deadline, we saw a massive spike. So an extra 100,000 people signed up because this, rule was going to kick in, which is a lot in a small country like Israel. And then we also got data on when next of kin are asked. So we've been talking about registering as an organ donor, for deceased donation as an individual. So I sign up and I agree to donate my organs, if I were to die in a way that would allow me to, allow the doctors to remove them. Another way you can get people to donate organs is you can ask next of kin of people who were not registered, because maybe the person never got around to it, but maybe they said to their family, you guys decide what's best, or oh, I'd be an organ donor. Or maybe they never said anything and the next of kin have to guess what they wanted, or do what the next of kin think is best. And so in Israel, they gave priority to family members of deceased donors who ended up donating. It's one thing to say, I get priority because I agreed that I would donate. But if I die and my organs are donated, then the priority kind of spills over to my family, to my wife and my kids. And so we saw like, okay, what is the effect of that policy on donation rates of people who die, who are eligible to donate, but who were not already registered? And we see a big increase in next of kin, who used to say like, I can't think about this. It's too stressful. My loved one just died, unexpectedly. And, kind of give them an incentive to say, hey, wait a second, this actually would be, it's not only good for the world, not only good for the recipients, but like we're not asking you to just do something out of the, goodness of your heart. We're also giving you something. We're giving you priority. If anyone, God forbid, needs this down the road, like the fact that you were willing to do this today, kind of protects your family from this need to a certain extent. Anyway, so we did evaluations of those policy changes and found how effective they were, in the hopes that more countries would kind of observe that and maybe change their rules.
Why? I mean, the way you're describing it, it seems like common sense, but I realize common sense isn't often common practice. But why wouldn't more countries be using these type of incentives to help their population?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. No, I think it's not. I mean, there's lots of industries I talk about in the book. This one is particularly um, fraught because there's a lot of people who have very strong feelings, right? So a lot of times people ask, like, well, why aren't we just monetarily compensating donors, right? Because they're doing this thing that is very generous, or why don't we pay people who donate an organ, like a kidney, while they're alive, right? But then other people are like, oh, absolutely not, like that's morally reprehensible. We should never be commoditizing the body. So this topic is very yeah, it's like kind of like a live wire. Like you have to be very careful when you approach it. So I don't, I think this priority, using the priority policy, is a good one. But again, that's a personal opinion based on the research I've done. But you could see it go the other way. Well, a more controversial statement that I also believe, but I think you can see why it then becomes trickier to kind of say, like, obviously we should do this, is, say you are similar to agreeing to be an organ donor is agreeing to take a vaccine for COVID-19 to slow down the spread of COVID. It has a similar property in the sense of, when you agree to be an organ donor, you kind of make organs more available. If you get a COVID-19 vaccine, then you kind of slow down the spread of COVID. You make the need for like emergency COVID care or like ventilators in a hospital, you make that kind of less scarce because there are fewer people getting deathly ill and needing that. And so the same logic as giving organs to people who agreed to be donors would say, if two patients are in the emergency room and they're equally sick and you only have one ventilator left, the priority policy would say, give the ventilator to the person who was vaccinated, not to the person who was not. I think that makes sense. I think that, it makes a lot of sense because they were willing to, to kind of do the thing that helped all of us. But you could see, other folks. In that case, I should caveat this by saying, like, if both people were medically eligible to get the vaccine, right? Like, you wouldn't want to punish people who couldn't get the vaccine because they were, compromised.
Right.
Right. Two healthy people who both could have gotten the vaccine. One said, no, I'm not interested, potentially put their, community at risk. The other one said, yes, I want to take it. So then, right. So it's the same kind of dynamic that plays out. And then at some point, and that's going to be more controversial. And there's probably middle grounds. Like, I think there should be HOV lanes that allow people to go faster if they are willing to carpool. Right. That's also making the scarce resource, in this case, the
Lane.
freeway lanes, kind of more there's fewer cars on the road if we're carpooling. I think most people like HOV lanes, but maybe there are people who think it's unfair, right? And so then at each point you have to kind of decide if you're comfortable with giving priority through the system to somebody who is ideally making the scarce resource less scarce.
Yes. And you mentioned the loopholes. Did you and Al use the students' capabilities to find loopholes? Because I always think of, students are so good at being like, well, yeah, there's this one exception.
Yeah. No, we simplified in that game. We simplified it to, you could click a button that said, I'd like to donate my organs at a small cost to myself. I would like to not donate my organ. Sorry, I would like to donate my organs at a small cost to myself and get priority, was option one. or like to not donate, not pay a cost, not get priority was option two. And then there was, we added, when we wanted to introduce a loophole, we added a third option, which was, I don't want to pay the cost, but I do want to get the priority. I just want to, I want the benefit, but I don't want the cost. And sure enough, there was a bunch of people who are willing to do that. Right. Some of the people who were induced in, or I should say probably like all of the people who were induced into donating because of the priority, right? Those people were in it for the priority. And so they were willing to take the loophole. They were not in it for the kind of being kind to other people. Those people are going to do it anyway. Those people would have donated even without the priority. We see that. But yeah, the people who you induce in, the reason you can't have loopholes in these systems is that they only are induced in because they can't figure out how to take the loophole.
Yeah, exactly. In your book, so far, what I've read, you use a lot of examples with your kids, and I'm curious, how you talk with your kids about being lucky by design and market design, and like how you think about the way they're like questions to ask them, the way they're like processing all this at their ages.
Yeah, so I don't tell them about like organ
Yeah,
donation policy, priority policies.
it's
No, I
so
use
good.
I use my kids in the book because I know that I'm an economist trying to write a popular book, and a book for a popular audience. And so I want people to like realize that it's approachable. That I want them to know that this is going to relate to their lives. This is not an ivory tower exercise. And actually, I had a lot of trouble writing the book. I had a lot of trouble figuring out what the voice was going to be at the beginning of the process. And I had this moment when it was like midnight and I was in bed and I was my mind was racing. It's like, why can't I figure like, how am I going to start this book off? And I just like had this like light bulb where I was like, oh, I know what I'm going to do. And I like woke up and I started typing for like 2 hours and I was like, all right, I got to go to sleep 2 a.m. But I had realized that the opening story should be me teaching my 4-year-old daughter, my youngest, how to play rock, paper, scissors. And the reason that was a relevant story was that it was an allegory for what the book was about. That she was watching her two older siblings decide who got access to scarce resources. In this case, who got the television remote, who got the last can of seltzer in the fridge, who got to decide what we had for dinner. She was watching them, this allocation happening based on this set of rules and this game that she didn't understand. Because it was just to her, it looked like they were just making hand gestures at each other, and then one was winning and being happy, and then one was sad, right? So then I explained to her the rules. So I explained, rock is a fist beats scissors, scissors are a V. Paper loses to scissors but beats rock. So I explained her the rules. We practiced each hand motion. And then she played against her older sister, who was 6 at the time. And my youngest, Natalie, just throws scissors every time. Like she's decided that that's how she's going to play the game, right? She understood the rules. Scissors are her favorite. She's just learning to cut in real life. So in the game, she's going to play scissors. And of course, her sister plays rock, a couple of times and beats her. And Natalie is devastated. And it's like, it's not enough to just understand the rules of the game. Like understanding the rules will help you see, the next time Natalie watches Cass and Isla, my two other kids, play each other, she'll understand why Cass won or Isla won. But if you want to succeed in the market yourself, you have to know the strategy. You have to figure out, okay, not only are these the rules, but this is what I should do to get what I want. And it was like, that is the allegory for the book. There are all these markets. I call them hidden markets, where price is not the thing that decides who gets what. It's not the typical econ story that we're used to, where you just, you go into the store, you pay for it or not. There's some other set of rules that decides who gets what. And if you want to understand the world well, you have to understand how those markets work. And if you want to succeed in those markets, get the scarce resource that is being doled out, you also have to know what strategy you should play. And so that like kind of cracked it for me. It's like, okay, this is an allegory for all of the kind of environments that we're in. They will be more important than getting the last can of seltzer or getting the television remote, but the same dynamic is at play.
Yeah. And did it surprise you when you were like, "Whoops, I missed a step of," like I gave her the rules, the understanding, right? But I forgot like you can't just Goes scissors every time.
I mean, for a 4-year-old, the fact that she picked up the rules, I wasn't disappointed, but it kind of made me realize that if I wanted to write a book about this topic, I should give both, right? Because I think as academics, we are used to saying, "Let me explain how the world works. Let me show you. Let me explain to you." In the book, the kinds of rules that allocate stuff are the centralized clearinghouses, like we talked about for organs, or my kindergarten, elementary school example. But it's also things that we're used to playing in a lot, so are very familiar to us, like first come first serve races, where you have to be the first person to click on something, to get it. First come first serve waiting lists or lines, mechanisms that rely on lotteries for allocation, mechanisms where or environments where there's kind of two sides, where you have to choose somebody or some institution, and they have to simultaneously choose you, and kind of you're both market participants. All of these situations are ones where it's not enough to just be like, let me explain how the system works and how why we do things this way and what does it achieve and not achieve. But like, if you're a participant in that market, I want to get a very desirable a reservation at a very desirable restaurant. If I want to help somebody succeed in that market, they have to also know what strategies to play, as opposed to just saying like, this is how it works.
Yeah. So when we talk about, when you talk about the strategy aspect, how do people know if they're playing the right strategy prior to, say, a final outcome occurring?
Yeah. So I think this is the key thing, which is that I wanted to get across in the book, but just in general, right? I want people to feel empowered and confident in these environments. So I want them to know that they're doing the right thing. And sometimes doing the right thing, you're not going to get what you want, right? Sometimes the optimal strategy is, I'm going to do a thing where there's some low probability of getting what I want, but maybe I will succeed. And so you can think about it with the rock, paper, scissors example, right? If the optimal thing is to randomly pick between scissors, rock, or paper, unless you know that your opponent isn't doing that, right? If your opponent mostly plays scissors, then you should play paper more often. And so that's the optimal strategy for you. You will not always win rock, paper, scissors playing the optimal strategy, right? You will, if you're playing against somebody who's also playing the optimal strategy, you will win a third of the time, lose a third of the time, and tie a third of the time, kind of by definition. So really what's important is knowing that you are kind of feeling confident in the strategy that you're playing, and feeling like kind of thought through what you should do and are implementing that. And you either get it or you don't, but you at least know you kind of gave yourself the best chance.
Yeah, yeah. Then with that confidence, does it allow us to continue to be participants in the market and play, versus going, oh no, that's not for me?
Yeah, I mean, you might decide, right? You can always decide that you don't want to participate in a market, but the kind of idea that the thing I'm trying to get across is, okay, say we'll use restaurant reservations as an example, like something concrete. Like, say I want a reservation at the French Laundry, which is, very expensive. So, you might think, oh, the price is going to resolve it. No, it's $400 to eat there, but there's only 17 tables and 60 seats at the restaurant. And it has 3 Michelin stars. So a lot of, and there's only a handful, only like a dozen restaurants in the US that have 3 Michelin stars. So it is a very desirable place to go. And so it has many more people who would happily pay $400 a meal to go there. The way that they allocate the reservations is through first come, first serve race, where they release all the reservations at 10 a.m. Pacific time on the first of the preceding month. So if you're trying to get a reservation for sometime in December, you need to go on November 1st at 10 a.m. Pacific time and be ready to click on one of the reservation times when the system opens up and lets everybody click. From experience, I can tell you that all of the reservations are gone within seconds of the system opening up. There are many, many people who want to eat there, enough that, the whole month will be gone within a minute. And part of part of what's happening, and I talk about this in the book as well, because you can't escape it in a lot of these markets, is that some of the reservations are being bought up by bots that are planning to resell them because there is all this excess demand, and so maybe they expect that if they claim a reservation, which requires prepaying for the whole meal, that they will then be able to sell that reservation at a profit to somebody else later on. Somebody who isn't willing to sit there, or who is sitting there at 10 a.m. but doesn't get a spot. So a lot of competition, and then you can think like, what is the set of strategies that you should be playing? Right. Again, you always can decide not to eat at the French Laundry. There's always the option to leave the market. But if you want to eat, what are the strategies? So the first ones are kind of obvious based on how I've described it, but would not have been obvious necessarily if I hadn't described how the system worked. Right. The first one is you have to be there at 10 a.m. on the first of the month. Right. If you show up in November, on November 12th, looking for a reservation for December 1st, it's too late. Right. So you have to be there. Second is you have to be on high-speed internet, because this is going to be a game of seconds. So being, hot spotting off of some spotty cell phone service, or being at a cafe where you're being throttled on your bandwidth, right? That's gonna really hamper your chances. And this is where I think it gets a little bit more interesting, because, or I should say, there's one other thing you can do, which is you can practice. You can learn how the interface works, right? Because if you're trying to figure out how do I select which date, and everybody else has already knows how to do that, and they'll be a few seconds ahead of you, so that's not great. So you want to be there when the race is going to be run. You want to know that the race is going to start. You want to have your fastest running shoes on, right? And you want to maybe have practiced the course once. That's what good runners do in real running conditions. But the thing that is kind of unique to this kind of market and requires a little more kind of economic thinking is maybe you want to race for something that is a little bit less desirable than your true first choice. So in the book, I call this settling for silver as opposed to going for gold. And so we would all love to get the absolute best thing. We'd all love to win the gold medal and be top of the mountain. But the problem is that if what you are racing for is something that is highly desirable across the board, a lot of people want to eat at the French Laundry at 7 p.m. on a Saturday, then your chance of winning that particular race is very, very small. And so you could decide that is what you wanted, but that would be going for gold. But if you're not, and to be clear, if that was the only mealtime that you wanted, right? If you were like, I'm only going to go to the French Laundry if I can eat at 7 on a Saturday, that's the only day I'm in town and that's the time I want to eat, then that's what you should go for, right? That's the only option. Yeah. But if you think about it and you say, what really matters to me is that I get to go to the restaurant. And if I have to eat at a less desirable time, I'm okay with that. Then your strategy should be, okay, the system opens up while everybody else is trying to click at 7 o'clock or 7:30, you go for 4:30. Yeah. Because that's less desirable. And that fewer people will be going for that. And so you end up getting to get a reservation. It's not at the ideal time, but it is kind of strategically the right move for you, given your preferences. And that's the kind of thing that I think we don't think about if we're not kind of conceiving of this as a kind of richer economic environment where you are competing against other people and some races are more competitive than others.
What prevents us from thinking about that alternative, going for silver versus going for gold, settling for silver? I mean, we call it settling, So.
It's true. No, I mean, it's not just alliteration, right? It's right. I liked the alliteration. Let's be honest. That was part of the fun of writing the book, was throwing in stuff like that. But no, it is settling, right? And that's why it's hard for folks. I'm thinking about this a lot right now because as we record, it's a college admission season for folks who are thinking about early decisions. And here's a setting that's much more kind of important to your life than whether you have dinner at a fancy, expensive restaurant, right? This is, what college are you going to go to for 4 years of your life? And the same dynamic is playing out, because what happens is for this first round of applications that are happening at November 1st is like a big deadline. Oh, so November 1st turned out to be the deadline in both my examples. That was a coincidence. or I'm thinking ahead, being very strategic. So November 1st is the deadline for a lot of early decision applications. With there's early decision and early action are two different versions of this. Early decision is you are committing to go to the school that you apply to. If they admit you, you must go. Early action is not a binding commitment, but typically these programs only allow you to apply to one school early action. So you don't have to go, but it kind of precludes you from applying to other places in the same early timing. And so what is happening in this early round? Like, why are people doing this? Well, both of those, in particular, you can think of early decision in this case, it is giving a very strong signal that you will attend the school to which you apply. Okay, with early decision, you're committing to it. With early action, it's kind of, it's you're sending a very strong signal that you are interested in this place among all of the options that you could have applied to early. And the school that is looking at your application really likes that because they care about their yield, about the fraction of people who they admit who end up matriculating. This is the kind of thing that when I was applying to college, 25 years ago, was in the US News and World Report rankings. Like it actually got entered into what is the best school. It's not used that way anymore, but it's still a matter of pride and kind of reputation because, right, that's why, it's hard to say you're the best school in the country if half the people you admit don't want to go there, right? They've decided some other school is better. So yield is something that signals to other people, like people who apply here want to come. We must be really good. So schools care about yield. So when you apply early, they reward you with a higher chance of admission. You see that folks, when they apply early, admission rates are typically higher than when folks apply in the regular decision round. So now you, as an applicant, have to decide, okay, where should I send my one early application? And this is where the going for gold, settling for silver really starts to get to you, right? Because there might be a school that you've been dreaming to go to. Penn, my employer, is early decision. It's a phenomenal place, filled with great students. So I could totally see why somebody would say, like, that is where I absolutely want to go. That is where I want to send my early decision application. Now, the question is, how does your application package compare to the folks who are applying? Because if you are not competitive against our whole swath of applicants, right? We have very high admission standards. And so, if your SAT score is well below what kind of the lower bound of what we normally accept is, or maybe it's like not so bad, but your GPA is kind of low, or you don't have any extracurriculars, like the things that the admissions committees are looking for, right? Then if you're not going to be competitive to get into Penn, it doesn't matter if you apply regular or early because, it's not going to happen. And so then all of a sudden you start thinking, well, maybe that's a candidate who should consider settling for silver. Maybe there's a school that's not your absolute top choice, but a school that maybe is your second or third choice, but one where you actually are competitive, maybe marginal. Maybe if you apply early, you'll get in, but if you waited a couple months and applied regular, you wouldn't. That's somewhere where the benefit of the early decision becomes very valuable to you. And so that's a case where, again, it is settling, right? If you've wanted to go to Penn your whole life, it's hard to say you shouldn't apply there. But if you're looking at Penn and thinking, I really want to go to Penn, but I actually like this other place, almost as much, and maybe I'm more competitive there, that's a settle for silver situation. That's don't waste your shot at a place where it's not going to go when there is a place that you are kind of almost equally or kind of close to, happy about. That would be an obvious case where you should settle.
Yeah, exactly. Temple. Go to Temple.
My mom went to Temple. She went to Tyler School of Art. She loved it. So, I have great things to say about my Philadelphia neighbor university.
That's great.
So, but that's the kind of thing. And so you can see this settling for silver, going for gold thing, it comes up a lot in these, what I call hidden markets, because it comes up a lot in situations where you are competing with other people for desirable scarce resources. And if you are thinking carefully about what other people want and recognizing that, maybe you want something because, well, I should say it's two things. One, it strategically might be better not to go for the thing that everybody else is going for. Another thing that, again, this is where the kind of behavioral economist in me comes out, is that one of the key things you have to do in hidden markets is think very carefully about what it is that you want and often why you want it. Right. So I was describing a situation where your decision to go for gold or settle for silver depended on how much you wanted to go to your first choice school versus how much you wanted to go to your second choice school. there is a psychological phenomenon that I have studied in a lot of my research that says we often go for things because other people are going for them.
Yes.
Social proof, it's called, or I study social information. When I learn that other people are doing something, how do I react to that? If that's driving some of your decisions, that's going to be a real killer for you, because it's going to make you want this thing that everybody else wants, and then you're going to be competing for something that you're not going to be able to get. You're going to be very disappointed. And so stepping back and saying, okay, what do I actually want this? Am I only interested in it because other people are interested in it? If that's the case, let me try to take that out of the equation and think kind of apples to apples with a better kind of comparison. Like, how do these two schools actually stack up on my preferences, ignoring, how all of my friends are applying to school A. And that is an important process to go through. That is a hard thing to do. Figuring out what you want is hard to do, right? It's the same thing with having the parents figure out which elementary schools they want to send their kids to. That is hard to do.
Yes.
But that's something you have to do, in addition to, in some markets, think about okay, once I've decided, how do I strategize in this market, given that, I really want A, or I'm actually okay between A and B. I want A a little bit more than B, but I'd be happy with B. Like, figuring out what you want and then figuring out the strategy are kind of both key to succeed here.
Yeah. And tell me if this is thinking is accurate or not, or how you tweak it. But I feel like nowadays, where we know, because of social media, like, we know what a lot of people, they're thinking and what they're after, and we're bombarded by those messaging. It could be harder to realize like what we want and why we want it. Is that accurate?
I think it is, in the sense of, in a lot of my research, including my dissertation research, I was interested in, when I learned that other people support something. And in my case, it was a charity. I was looking at how messages of support for a charity influenced giving from other people. And I did a field experiment where I was looking at giving among people at real workplaces, where they had a campaign that was at each workplace that was collecting money for a charity. And I gave them little pins they could wear that said, "I support," and had the charity name and logo. And the idea was that was going to communicate to other people that you supported the charity. And you could wear that whether you donated or not. There was no restriction on that. And I found that workplaces that had those pins that said they supported the charity uh, had much higher donations than the workplaces that randomly were not provided with those. And the effects were isolated among workplaces that kind of had middling levels of donation. So you didn't need them when everybody was giving, like when everybody knew that everybody gave, this message wasn't helpful. At workplaces where like less than 4% of people were giving, like very few people gave, they didn't really help because there just wasn't that much enthusiasm. The workplaces where 4% to 40% of people were donating is where all of the effect came from. That was a place where, see the pin, I learn that my colleagues are interested in supporting the charity. I'm more likely to support, or I give a little bit more. So that's the phenomenon that I studied. But then in subsequent, in the same academic paper, but in subsequent experiments, I showed that you get the same thing, the same mechanism, the same effect on behavior with just an anonymous message that people in a laboratory can send to each other. In the game I made, you could just send a message that somebody got on their screen that said, "I support this charity." So all it's telling you is like somebody else in this room sent a message to you. You don't know who they are. It's just they had the option to send this and they did. And that to me is much more like in social media, you often know the person and maybe you kind of respect them or follow them, or maybe they're a influencer or a celebrity. But even an anonymous stranger that says they support the charity induces you to give more. And that to me says, look, this is a very kind of widespread phenomenon that could be triggered by any kind of message. And so the more communicating we're doing about this kind of stuff, so back to your question, right? The more I'm seeing my friends post on social media with like, "Oh, I'm really excited about applying to Penn," or whatever the thing ends up being, right? I'm really excited to go to this fancy restaurant, or I'm really excited to stand on this line to get this product, or I'm really excited to, about my Labubu that I'm hanging on my backpack, the fad product of the summer, right? All of those things, like I would not ever, if I just walked around in the world, I wouldn't be exposed to so many people telling me all of the things that they want and value. And now I'm just bombarded with it. And so, of course, it's going to make me kind of, or I shouldn't say, of course, I would say my research would suggest it's going to make me say, I want that thing. And that's going to make competition for those scarce resources even stronger.
Uh-huh. Well, I want to make sure we're keeping your wife happy.
I promised her we'd keep it to an hour. We're getting.
Exactly. So what I've seen out in the world is like people are buying up your books, right?
That's that. The lesson is everybody should go buy it, and that is not a scarce resource unless the publisher messes up.
right.
They will produce more, and they will keep the price where it's at. They're not going to raise it just because you want it.
It's not going to $100,
Nope.
200. Yeah.
Even if demand spikes, they'll just produce more. They've set their price.
Right. If you really want to get into my class, you pay $250 for my book.
Wharton won't let me do that, it turns out. They won't let me sell spots in my class, so we have to have some other mechanism. I talk about it in the book, about how people get in.
Exactly.
But it's not through bribing me.
So where can people find out more about you and your work, buy your book, and any final comments as we're
I mean, my final comment is thank you for a great conversation. Folks can find me at juddbkessler.com. There's a book page there. They can also go to the website, which I was very proud of myself for claiming early, getluckybydesign.com. So I'll take them right to the book page on my website. And they can follow me on LinkedIn or connect with me on LinkedIn to kind of learn more, and I'll be posting there. But yeah, no, just thank you for a great conversation. This was a lot of fun. As you saw, you kind of got me on the topics I like talking about.
Yes.
And our research and stuff in the book. So anyway, thank you for that.
My pleasure. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and if you liked it, please share with a friend on social media. That goes a long way to promoting this podcast so I can continue to interview and share these conversations with fascinating people. You can follow me on social media, Chad Stoloff, and visit my website, chadstoloff.wordpress.com, for more information. I'd love it if you would leave a review to support the podcast. Thanks so much. Until next time.